What was it like when you were first taken?
I'm in my hotel room. One of my friends is with me. We're getting ready to go to the wedding dinner. We just spent the day in Moscow as tourists in the central area, so Red Square, the Kremlin. There are several museums and galleries within the Kremlin itself, so we've just been there all day. FSB comes into my room, violently arrested. They say, "Mr. Whelan, you're under arrest for espionage." And so I said, "I haven't committed espionage." And they say, "Well, we think you have." And this conversation was happening in English because they knew that I didn't speak Russian. So, I'm handcuffed, taken out of the room, taken to one of their local FSB stations. And that's where, they started, asking my name, looking at documents, kind of pretending like they were doing, the initial investigation. Well, they had just come to my room in force. They had, I don't know, probably 10 or 20 FSB officers and others in the hallway at the hotel. This wasn't something that they had just kind of like stumbled upon. This was something they had planned. And I say this all the time. It wasn't just a couple of FSB guys that went to the bar, got drunk on vodka, and decided to go to a well-known hotel where international guests stay and bang on doors to find an American to arrest for espionage. This was something that was planned from the top down. So it was kind of scary. At first I thought maybe my friends had set it up, maybe it was some sort of prank, but it got real very quickly.
FSB stands for?
Well, in English it's the Federal Security Service. They're basically, it's the old KG, or it's the new KGB. The old version was the KGB. They do intelligence, counterintelligence. If somebody needs to be assassinated, they do that. In Russia, people fall out of windows all the time. Well, they're the ones pushing those people out. That's their role.
So are you panicking? I mean, you're a Marine, and I know you're never called a former Marine. You're always a Marine, once a Marine, correct?
Right.
So you're a Marine. Are you panicking when the FSB comes in there and says you're under arrest?
I'm not panicking as much as I'm wondering, why they think I'm the person that needs to be targeted, or why they're coming after me. It became clear fairly quickly because after this kind of initial charade of, who are you, where are you from, et cetera, they said, look, America arrested Maria Butina and we want her back. And so our idea is that we're going to do a trade. So, just kind of take it easy, chill in your cell, don't do anything rash. This will be worked out. Your ambassador is going to come fairly quickly. And I said, well, that's good. I said, but I want all 4 of my ambassadors. And they looked at me and said, what do you mean 4 ambassadors? I said, I'm a citizen of 4 countries, so I have 4 ambassadors, and I want all 4 of them to come. Well, that seemed to throw them off.
So you were a citizen of 4 countries?
I am, yeah.
Name them.
So I was born in Canada to British parents and grandparents from Ireland, and I'm naturalized American.
Oh.
So I have 4 passports.
Wow.
Now, originally the FSB had said that those passports were fake. And the initial news out of the FSB was they were fake passports, the Americans had provided them. They had to backtrack because the foreign ministry in Russia said, no, they are real. He is a citizen of 4 countries. It's legitimate. The FSB, to the day that I left Russia, would never admit that they, number 1, they were wrong, and number 2, that I was a citizen of 4 countries.
So let me ask you something else. So you were in Russia for a wedding. You weren't working in Russia.
No.
So you were just there for the wedding.
Right.
So clear this up on camera if you can, because people will still in the back of their minds say, was he a spy? You were not a spy.
I was not a spy. I've never been an intelligence officer. I don't have formal ties to any government organization that's involved with espionage. So the Russians had said I was a brigadier general in the Defense Intelligence Agency. I was a secret agent that had gone there to get names and photographs of students at the border guard school. And, it was just contrived for their purposes.
Wow, so you're just there. Whose wedding was it?
A friend of mine.
Just a friend's wedding, you're there having a good time, and then here they come and they change your life.
The other funny piece of that is there were people in our group that worked in Washington, D.C., and that were connected with the government, and they would have been a better catch than me. I was kind of the low-hanging fruit of the group.
And they grabbed
And they grabbed me.
And so they told you, hey, relax. This is going to be over quickly. When they slammed the door and put you in a jail cell, were you like, wow, this is serious?
Yeah, it wasn't any jail cell. It was Flora prison, which is an FSB prison. This is where, for the last 100 years, they've put people they haven't liked, and they've killed a lot of people there. People like Paul Whelan, a Swedish diplomat who helped Jews escape from Germany during World War II. The Soviets arrested him, put him in Flora, and killed him. Flora.
And this is a prison?
It's a prison.
Flora. So describe then, where are you in Flora?
It's a very old prison. It was built in the 1800s. The walls are 3 feet thick. The cells, I think they're 9 square yards, 9 square meters. They're not nice. They're not as horrible as some cells around the world, but they're not nice.
So give me a sense. We're sitting at this green picnic table. 2 of these, 3 of these. How big is it when you look at this?
The room was as wide as this seat to that seat.
Okay.
So I could easily put my hands on both walls. It was 15 steps from the doorway to the bed, so I could walk 15 steps forward and back.
Wow. So that's pretty small. What's in there?
So there are 2 steel beds that are bolted to the floor. There's a sink and a commode.
Is there a mattress?
Well, you could call it a mattress.
A thin little piece.
It wasn't much.
Did you have a blanket?
Oh yeah, we had blanket.
You had a blanket and a pillow and this steel.
Thin mattress
on
a steel platform.
Was that meant to be torturous if you were thrown in there?
I think it probably meets the bare standards of what a prison cell in that country, should provide. They can say, well, there's a mattress. It's not much of a mattress. Well, yeah, it's still a mattress. There's a blanket. It's not much of a blanket, but there's still a blanket. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. So you're in this small room. How many hours a day?
23.
Oh my God. So you're in there 23 hours and they only let you out for an hour?
Yeah, so we'd go up to the roof for 1 hour, and there were cells on the roof, open air cells, and we could walk around in the cell or whatever. That's where we got most of our exercise and fresh air.
So you could walk around, get fresh air, and then come back to this little tiny room.
Yeah.
And there's 1 of you or 2 of you in this tiny room.
Just me.
Just you. And they would only let you take a shower once a week or twice a week?
Oh, once a week.
Once a week.
And sometimes they had issues with their plumbing, so it would be 1 shower every 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Wow. What's going through your head?
Well, you come from a first world country, right? And then you're stuck into basically a third world existence. And you're in this tiny little cell. People are speaking a language you really don't understand. They're doing things with a sense of purpose that is false. They've already told me that I was wrongfully held, right? They've said they've made this up. Our government say I'm wrongfully held. And it's kind of like, okay, so we're going through the parts of a play, let's say. And the funny thing is, later on, when I met the judge in my case, he said, Paul, don't worry about this. We're all going to play a part in this play, and it's going to move through the trial portions. And just think of it as the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. It's a play. Everyone's playing a role. Everyone's playing a part.
So when they see, like when I was watching news programs, whether it was CNN or ABC News, and you would come out and we'd see you behind bars, and you were sort of stone-faced, no emotion. Did they tell you to come out with no emotion, and you were just kind of?
No. They have a weird way of doing things in Russia. Most people don't get the perp walk like I did. So they set that up. They set it up with all the media so that they would have me walk through the media going into court, and then I would be in the fishbowl, which was glass, or one of the cages. And the reporters would come in and they'd take pictures. Generally, I tried to look at the cameras because I knew there was some marketing value in what they were doing, that it could help me. And there were some pictures actually that the media took while I was in prison that I use today for social media because they're so good. But there was a lot to be said for the Russians wanting the media attention, and then the media attention being good for me to get my message out back home.
This is 5.5 years that you...
5 years, 7 months, 5 days.
5 years, 7 months, 5 days in this little cell.
No, actually it was 1.5 years in that cell, and then the last 4 years I was in a labor camp in Mordovia.
So they moved you
Right.
to Mordovia. And in the labor camp, what did you have to do in the labor camp? So if you were there for a year and a half,
Yes.
and then so for the remainder in this labor camp, what was that like?
So I was convicted. So we had a show trial. The trial was a joke. The judge was a nice enough person. He said, "Okay, Paul, today we're going to look at evidence. Do you want to see the evidence?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "We have 10 boxes of evidence here. You can see the boxes." And I said, "Yeah, okay, fine. I want to see the evidence against me." "Well, it's a state secret, so you can't. We can't divulge a state secret." And this was a secret trial, right? So there was only the judge, prosecutor, my lawyers, and me. And my lawyers were provided by the Russian government. I wasn't allowed to have my own, legal team. So I said, "Okay. What about witnesses?" The judge was like, "Yes, you can have witnesses if you like." And I said, "Fine. They need to come from my world. We need visas. We need them to come in. We've got to prep them, whatever." He said, "Oh, because of COVID, you can't have witnesses. So no evidence, no witnesses." It's like, "Well, Your Honor, what kind of trial is this?" One of the funny pieces, the FSB had said that I wanted names and photos of cadets at the border guard school. Well, just like our Customs and Border Protection roll up to DHS, in Russia, the Border Patrol rolls up to the FSB, as a lot of agencies, the prisons and others do. So the FSB had said, "Well, these are FSB officers." And the judge corrected the FSB and said, no, they're not. They haven't graduated, so they're not officers, and they're not in the FSB, they're in the Border Guard. These are Border Guard students, and their pictures and names are not secret. So he hasn't tried to get secret information, or he hasn't, received secret information. And the prosecutor and the FSB are like, no, we say that he has.
Oh.
And the judge is like, "I'm telling you, this is not secret. Once those cadets graduate, okay, maybe it would be secret then, but you arrested him and charged him with something, and this information is not secret." So at the next court appearance, the FSB came in with a one-page letter saying, "For the purposes of this trial, that information was deemed secret." And that's Russia. That's Russia.
So basically, they can charge you with anything and say that you did this wrong, and basically
Make it up.
Make it up and say you're convicted.
Yeah.
Now.
So I'm convicted, and I sit at Flora for 45 days after conviction, while the U.S. and the Russians try to work out a deal. And this would have been 2020. No deal is reached, so I moved to this labor camp in Mordovia. Mordovia is a backwater. It's really it's been neglected and forgotten about for years. And the only economy there is these prisons. There are a lot of prisons. Trevor Reed was in a prison there. A lot of the camps were built during World War II by German prisoners of war. And you can still see the hallmarks of how the Germans did things from the 40s. The camps look like Dachau and Auschwitz. They're built in that same manner. The camp, on the perimeter, you have a fence and there are guards on the perimeter. There's an administrative section with guards, but the living section, we have barracks and there are no guards. The factory where we had to work, no guards. Everything was run by the prisoners. And that's how the Germans ran their concentration camps. They had prisoners who were in charge. The same sort of system. So suffice to say, the conditions were bad, and the Russians will say, well, it's prison, the conditions are part of the punishment. But a lot of times we didn't have any water. The water was really brackish, it was horrible. We could shower maybe once a week, maybe every couple of weeks. It was extremely cold in the barracks, it was extremely hot. There were no creature comforts at all. And you'd have 2 toilets for 80 people.
Oh
right?
My.
And they were squat toilets, if you know what I mean, not Western toilets. Everything was very, very primitive. And like I said, it's a third world country outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg.
And you became such a leader, even in the labor camp, that they started calling you Uncle Paul.
Right. So at first, probably a third of the camp was Russian, and the rest were foreigners, but mainly Central Asians. So Tajiks, Uzbeks, Turkmen, Kazakhs, people like that. Once the war in Ukraine started, the Russians took the Russian citizens to the war. So they had to go and fight. The camp filled up with even more of these Central Asians, many of them between like 17 and 25, who had gone to Russia to work because they don't have to have a visa coming from former Soviet countries. They'd come to work so they could send remittances home. The Russians just snatched them up. They have a joint of marijuana, it's 5 years in prison. Hooliganism. youthful indiscretions, we would call it, 5 years in Russia, right? They used the prison labor as part of their economy. So they had to backfill all of these kind of positions that were open because of the war. So they grab all these young kids, they come in, they see me, they've seen me on TV, they kind of, know who I am. I think at first they were amused, like, what is this? Who is this person? And then we became friends, obviously, and they started calling me uncle. And because of my age and the way they do things in their part of the world, they were quite polite, quite deferential, and we had a good relationship.
So let me ask you this. Let's fast forward a bit. So when you're in this labor camp and the years are going by, and I see your sister, pouring out her heart in front of the television cameras and saying how unfair it is that my brother is still being left, and you see other people being released. Is there any moment in your mind where you're like, I may never get released, I may die in this labor camp, or were you always optimistic and thinking, no, I'm going to get out?
I was optimistic. The U.S. government had said they were coming for me, and that means something, especially to veterans. It's a term that's used in the military. We don't leave people behind. So when I'd see a news article, or I would see a clip online, and a spokesman for the NSA was saying, Paul, we are coming for you. I said, okay, that's a promise. Promises made, promises kept. The National Security Advisor, the Secretary, Jake Sullivan, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, they were saying, Paul, we're coming for you. And I spoke with the Secretary from prison several times, long conversations, which was kind of funny. And then also Ambassador Roger Carstens, the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, again, telling me, we're coming for you, we're trying to work this out. They would give me information, and information would come in from my embassies about what the problems were. Krasikov was arrested. That kind of gummed things up a little bit. The war in Ukraine, that slowed down negotiations.
Krasikov, describe him for me.
Vadim Krasikov, he was an FSB colonel, and he was an official assassin. Putin came out and said, yeah, this guy's ours. We sent him to kill a Chechen rebel leader, and we want him back.
And he was in Germany.
He was in Germany. He had gone to, from Vienna, which is a stronghold for espionage. He'd gone to Germany following a Chechen leader that the Russians say is a rebel leader, and he killed him in broad daylight in a park just like this, with women and children there. The German police grabbed him, and as soon as that occurred, the Russians said, hey, America, we want this guy back. A NATO country has him, we want him back.
And so they were willing to say, you give us Paul Whelan, we'll give you Paul Whelan if you make a deal with Germany.
Right.
And initially they said they couldn't.
Yeah, the U.S. said, well, we don't have this guy, the Germans do. If you want him back, you need to speak to Germany. And Russia said, well, America, you control NATO, Germany's a NATO country, hence, you have control over Germany. So talk to your NATO country and tell them to pony up. Eventually, the U.S. did that, and Germany did, release Krasikov as part of the exchange, but it took a little while to do.
Now, we fast forward 5.5 years. How do you get word that, Paul, you're free?
Well, I've been in contact with the Secretary of State. We actually had some funny conversations. Most world leaders can't get 5 or 10 minutes with him on the telephone. We would have, calls for 45 minutes. It was good because I had that high-level connection, and people were telling me what was happening, what wasn't happening. And I was speaking to the, Ambassador Carstens, the SPIHA. I was speaking to others, and I had gleaned that before Trevor came home and before Brittany came home, they were asked to write a pardon. And one day, these 2 young FSB officers turned up at the camp. They'd come every couple weeks with the prosecutor to make sure that I was okay. They didn't want me complaining to people in Moscow and having it rolling down on their shoulders in this, tiny backwater. They wanted to, seek promotion and go to, Kazan or Moscow or St. Petersburg. They didn't want to be stuck in this little remote place. So they're like, Paul, if you have issues, tell us. We'll try to work them out. As I've said before, I was able to have 2 wardens and a deputy warden arrested and convicted for corruption while I was there, and that was with the help of the FSB and the prosecutor, which is it's an unusual story that I'm going to cover in my book in the future. But suffice to say, these two young FSB guys turn up. They've got a piece of paper and a pen, and they're like, Paul, we need you to write a letter of request for pardon to President Putin. And I said, okay, got it. Now, I'd written these letters before, and they'd gone nowhere. They probably just went in the circular file, in the trash can. I said, okay, that's fine. I'll write something out and have somebody I know that speaks English and Russian, kind of translate it for me. And next time you guys turn up, I'll give it to you. And they're like, no. We want you to write it now. Write it in English. It doesn't matter what it says. Say your parents are old, that you're tired of being here. You don't have to admit to anything. Just say you want a pardon. And I said, really? I said, why do you need it so quickly? Why the rush? And they're like, we need it. Moscow needs it. And so that was kind of a clue. The people in Moscow needed this request for pardon. I had known from when Trevor and Brittany went home that they had done the same thing. They'd written these letters. So I said, okay. So I wrote something very quickly, gave it to them. They rushed off, and then I, using one of the burner phones that we had in the camp, made some calls back home. And although nobody would confirm what was happening, there was enough indication that things were going in the right direction, and that I could possibly be free.
You said a burner phone. You said you could get anything, even though you were in a Russian prison. As long as you had the money, you could get anything in there.
Right. So it's Russia. It's extremely corrupt, and in prison, if you have cigarettes, you have money. So we would have money coming into our commissary accounts. We'd buy cigarettes, and then we'd give the cigarettes to the guards. We'd get burner phones, SIM cards, fruit and vegetables sometimes, other things. But the number one source of contraband in a prison is the guards. And in Russia, they all have their hand out. So, I would use my Tajik and Uzbek friends as kind of like middlemen. They would go and broker these deals. And then, we would come up with the cigarettes, and, we'd stay in touch with our families. And with me, it was staying in touch with government officials as well, and the media. I'd speak to the media from prison.
Now, let me ask you a question. So your family would always say, Paul is sick. Paul needs to come home.
I was sick, yeah.
Yeah, tell what was your worst day?
Well, the worst day was when I was taken in an ambulance from La Fortova prison to a hospital for emergency hernia surgery. The doctors at the prison in La Fortova in Moscow said, I had a hernia and it needed surgery. That's the only way to fix a hernia. You can't take a tablet. The FSB said, okay, well, we can use this to our advantage. If he's having medical problems, maybe we can use this as leverage against the Americans. Well, what ended up happening is I had a strangulation, hernia strangulation. So 2 a.m, they took me to a hospital for emergency surgery. So there I am. I don't speak Russian. They want me to sign waivers in Russian. They're saying, don't worry, it's a good hospital. I'm looking around saying, this looks like MASH, the TV show. I mean, it was meatball surgery. Everything was old and didn't work. It was broken. I was just like, wow, this is not the kind of hospital that we have. It's not U of M, not St. Joe's. It's not what I'm used to. The surgery seemed to work. Hernia surgeries aren't that serious, but I was awake the whole time. They gave me an epidural, so I couldn't feel anything from the waist down, but I was awake, and they had a mirror, set up on the light so I could see what was happening. And it was, they wouldn't give me any medications, no Tylenol, no tablets, nothing at all.
So they cut you open, fixed that up, and you're looking, and are you praying and saying, oh my God, I hope I make it through this?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
That was probably the scariest, moment. The rest of it, I could look at what was happening. I could kind of analyze it and understand, and then work my way through it without getting involved in like a lot of the prison drama. You have to step back and look at what's happening. But yeah, the surgery was that was scary. The issue too was that we knew there was a problem. The Russians knew there was a problem, and the Russians were trying to use it as leverage against our people, and that was troublesome because in the back of our minds we were remembering that a guy named Magnitsky, he was an attorney. He was a diabetic. Everybody knew he was diabetic, and he died of a diabetic emergency in prison because nobody wanted to help him. And
so that had to have been going through your mind.
and the FSB is behind that kind of thing. And then fast forward to February of 2024, Navalny.
Yes.
He was supposed to be part of the trade, right? That's what Germany wanted.
Yes.
Well, guess what?
He died.
The FSB killed him in prison. And so we're thinking, wow, if the FSB is going to do this sort of thing, then what does that mean for us? I mean, they already let me sit around for months with a dangerous medical problem to use as leverage? What if now they push me down some steps and I break a leg, or they poison me, something like that, to try to leverage? And they grabbed Evan Gershkovich for leverage. That's the only reason they arrested him.
So that is going through your head.
Oh,
then.
yeah,
As
of
you're
course.
sitting there, you're thinking, oh my God, they could kill me at any moment.
Yeah, and we had no medical care in the camp. There was no dental care. So if you go into the camps in good shape, you'll probably do okay. But if you're not in good shape, or you're older, or you just need routine medical care or routine medical services, there's nothing there. They don't believe in it.
So then, what was your what was the moment like when you first stepped on American soil again?
Okay, so keep in mind that for the 5 days before I left Russia, I was in solitary confinement.
This is after you signed the
Yeah,
pardon.
so I signed the request, and then that was on a Tuesday. Saturday we drive back to Moscow, and then for 5 days I'm in solitary confinement. I wasn't allowed out to exercise. I couldn't have a shower. So here's me with a bit of a beard. I hadn't had a shower in a couple weeks, and they gave me my clothes back to wear, but they were clothes that I had taken to Russia 5.5 years earlier. So they'd been in a bag, kind of, probably had a bit of an odor to them too. And they said, put these on. So I put them on. We get on a plane, we fly to Turkey, we do the exchange in Turkey, get on a CIA plane coming back. And I'm told on the plane, hey, the president and vice president, some other dignitaries, and the media are going to meet us at Andrews Air Force Base. Well, that's the furthest thing from my mind. But I'm thinking to myself, wow, I don't look like I should to meet the president. So I had to borrow a razor and shave, shaving cream, soap, and things like that, and clean up on the plane, so that when I got off the plane, I looked appropriate.
But did Russia want you to look that way?
They didn't care.
They didn't care?
No, they don't.
You're leaving. They don't care how you look.
They don't care. Trevor came back in his prison uniform because they wouldn't let him, wear his own clothes. I mean, they didn't care. They just basically were kicking us out of the country.
So you clean up, and when you see Biden and you see other dignitaries, what are you thinking?
Well, Evan was with me in Alshuk, Kermasheva. We're on the plane. They said, Paul, you've been there the longest, you're going to go first. And the idea was that we would get off the plane, there would be a reception line, the president, vice president, national security advisor, other dignitaries, media in the background, and our families. And we would shake hands, walk to the operations building with our family for a reunion. Well, if you see the video, you'll see that, I came down, I waved, and then I stopped and I gave the president a salute. And then, he walks up, he gives me a hug, we start talking, hug the vice president, and we're just kind of talking. I go to see my sister, and then Evan comes down, and Evan's just standing there like, well, hey, what about me? Because the president and vice president were engaged with us. So there's this funny moment where Kamala, she turns around and she's like, hey, here we are. And so instead of like a scripted, a scripted event with protocols and things, all of that went out the window. And we just, we talked. Alsu and her family were there, her children, the president, vice president, the other dignitaries. We were just kind of mingling and chatting and things.
Are you telling me that when you saw your sister for the first time, you didn't bust out in tears?
No, I didn't.
Your sister did, though.
Oh, she did, yeah.
I know she did. Because I watched her talk about you so many times. She was so emotional. Every time I saw her, I was like, oh my God, if they don't let him out. And I'm saying that for me to you. Your sister was like, your cheerleader. I'm sure you know that.
Well, one of the interesting things, too, you probably saw it on TV, is after Alsu came down, I circled back and I was talking to the president, vice president. And President Biden took the flag on his lapel. He took it off and put it on my shirt. And so I've got that. I wear it sometimes. But, that was just one of those kind of nice moments, something that I'll remember.
Do you think you weren't as emotional because of your training in the Marines?
Yeah, I think, I think I was processing what was happening. But, the president, the vice president, they're just normal people. They're very, very easy to talk to and get along with. And, I treat them, I treated them the same way I treat everybody, with, dignity and respect. But they're normal people. And when I walked down the steps and I met them, we just engaged like normal people, and we had all sorts of funny conversations, over the next like 20 minutes. So yeah.
Okay. So now that you're out, how long have you been out?
It'll be a year on the 1st.
It'll be a year on the 1st. Do you ever wake up from nightmares?
I don't have nightmares. In Flora for a year and a half, they kept the light on at night. In the labor camp, they'd wake me up every 2 hours at night to make sure I hadn't escaped, and they'd shine a light in my eyes and take a picture.
Every 2 hours?
Yeah, for 4 years. They say that they're allowed to do it as a security precaution. We say it's harassment. It's sleep deprivation.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not good. We say it's torture. They say it isn't. It took me a while after I got home to get used to it, just like a normal sleep pattern and rhythm and whatnot. So I'm over that. I came back with horrible...
So would you wake up like, oh my God, like,
yeah,
where am I?
yeah,
Oh.
every couple hours. I came back with horrible case of, well, in both feet, plantar fasciitis from the horrible footwear that we had to wear. That took a while to get over. The travel that I've done, going to DC, going to speak to people, media, Capitol Hill, et cetera, has meant that I've had to stay in hotel rooms. Well, I was violently arrested by a rogue intelligence agency in a hotel room, and to this day, I don't take the chest of drawers and the table and chairs and block the door. But every time I'm in a hotel room, it reminds me that not too long ago I was in a hotel room and I was violently taken out of it.
So let's talk about the lack of support. So a lot of Americans listening to you may be shocked to hear that you didn't receive like a boatload of money and health care and insurance and back pay and all of the things because you lost 5.5 years of your life going through all of this. So what happened financially?
Well, when you come back, you're given medical exams. You can speak to a psychologist. The government allows 20 days, kind of for reintegration. But we do that in Texas, and even once you leave that, you're on your own to get home. So flying from Texas to Michigan, I was on my own. The Hostage Recovery Act provides 5 years medical care, dental care, psychological care, and whatnot. But apparently, it's never been funded. So the State Department won't provide that care for us. Michigan laws precluded me receiving unemployment benefits.
Why?
Well, because the way the law is structured, you have to work for 20 months or 20 weeks, before you apply. And so, although they were very sympathetic and said they wish they could help me, they said this is something the Michigan legislature has to change to work an exemption in.
Oh my. Okay.
So there's a lot of, I had great local support, people in Manchester, in Michigan, around Michigan, from Congress, all over the place. But when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of being at home, people are like, well, yeah, we have all kinds of programs for people, social safety nets for asylum seekers, refugees, whatever, but you're not one of those, so you don't fit into our cookie cutters of social assistance.
So here you were a prisoner of war, or not even a prisoner of war, you were just a prisoner over in Russia for 5.5 years, and there was no safety net for you when you came home.
No, there should be, but like I said, the State Department, the Congress wrote it into the law. The State Department says Congress never funded it, so they're not providing anything.
Congresswoman Amy Stevens, though, she's helping quite a bit.
Right. So she's working on financial compensation, as well as having the health care that we're supposed to get funded properly, and then looking at how the federal government can help with employment, help with housing, help with things like that. I came home to no home. I didn't have, my house was gone. I didn't have a job. Cars were gone. Finances had been used over the years to store things, to pay attorneys, marketing, all sorts of things. I came home and basically had to start again. One of the sad chapters of this is that I was the director of global security for BorgWarner, and I had come up with, and we had implemented just before I left for Russia, a critical event management program. So if something had happened to one of the senior members of the company, our employees overseas, that we would know how to address it, right? So we had a plan. They have kidnap and ransom insurance, like $75 million worth. And we thought, okay, we're fine. If any of our people travel overseas, they run into problems, they're covered. BorgWarner, as soon as I was arrested, said, well, this wasn't a work trip, it was a personal trip. And they lawyered up, and they haven't spoken to us since. So they did provide my salary for the first year, but they didn't provide any medical benefits and things like that, which became a problem when I needed the hernia surgery, because I didn't have medical insurance anymore. So I had to go to a Russian hospital, not one of the better hospitals in Moscow, where like one of the international hospitals. And so there were some ramifications. Since I've been back a year, I've contacted them. They won't speak to me. My lawyer tried contacting them. They won't speak to him.
Oh my.
They know they did wrong. They know they did wrong, so they're hiding. They could have at least welcomed me home, right?
At least.
Yeah. So these are the sorts of things that we as former hostages run into. It's distressing because, I provided executive protection for executives of the company. I was traveling, doing, their business, and then when something happens, instead of using the critical event management program we came up with, they just, they lawyered up and said, well, it's not our business. But, as a salaried employee, as you're traveling around the world, whether you're on vacation or not, and I wasn't on vacation. This was a company furlough where everybody's off, between Christmas and New Year's. As a salaried employee, you're working 24/7. It doesn't matter if you're on vacation, it's a weekend, you're doing things. And at that level, sitting in Moscow, I was answering emails, I was having phone calls with other parts of the world. So it's disingenuous for them to say, oh, it was a personal trip, had nothing to do with us, he wasn't, doing anything to benefit us while we were there. And for them to just kind of lawyer up and, play dumb.
What's the name of that company?
Borg Warner.
At this point, do you suffer from PTSD or anything like that from everything that you've gone through, being in a Russian prison to coming home with absolutely nothing and no safety net?
It's probably a form of PTSD. There are things that I have to work through. Things that in the past would have come easily. Now I have to kind of consider, okay, what am I going to do? How's this going to impact, the rest of my life? Really, I'm starting over. I'm starting over with a lot of things. Getting a driver's license, professional licenses, jobs. Jobs have been an issue. Some people say, well, you're 55. You're highly qualified for entry-level positions, but for the positions you should be seeking, you've got this 6-year gap in employment. So it's kind of like, you've left the workforce to raise a family and you've come back, and people are like, yeah, you did have a lot of training and experience, but now you've got this gap, so you should look for lower positions, but you're overqualified for the lower positions, right? And age plays a factor. Some people aren't going to hire someone who's 55. The other piece is that there's a stigma from being in prison. Even though I was wrongfully held, I was still in prison. So people will say, well, give it a couple years to assimilate back into our culture so you don't have any bad habits from prison, and then, come back and apply. Well, what do I do in the meantime? And this is one of the reasons that the compensation is extremely important, because I'm not the only one going through this. Trevor Reed, Mark Swadan, all of these other people, Mark Fogel, all these other people that have come back from other countries. Mark Swadan, he was in China for 12 years. He lost everything. And, I have a GoFundMe account. We rely on the kindness of strangers to help. One of the people that I mentioned was Justin Geller. He's my dentist. When I came home, he said, Paul, we don't care what the issues are. We're going to cover it. We'll take care of whatever you need done. And they've done a lot for me. And, people in Manchester, they've done a lot, personally and as a community. The Detroit Area Dealers Association, they gave me a Ford Escape. It's a bit of a joke, escape from Russia. But they're like, hey, you need a vehicle? Okay, here's a vehicle. And these are the sorts of things that, locally people are doing. Even I've got this Yeti water bottle with my name on it. In prison, I had a Yeti tumbler. And when Yeti found out that I had had the tumbler there for all that period, when I came home, they sent me a big box of Yeti stuff, customized with my name on it.
Oh my God.
All kinds of people have come out of the woodworks and they've done all sorts of things, to help me out. Now what we'd like to see is the federal government step up and have a program that honors what's in the law, but also, make sure that people have somewhere to go, a house, a home, that people have compensation, as if they were wrongfully held here. People have employment, just the basics that people need. It's fortunate for me that I've had the help that I've had, but it's still extremely difficult. And myself included, but others in this situation need more help. And incrementally, we should continue working on how we can take care of the people coming home until the government can work on the deterrence enough that we don't have to worry about having hostages being taken around the world anymore.
Am I missing anything?
Well, you know, one of the things that I brought up was an issue with the post office. When I was in Texas, after coming home, had a medical exam, you know, went through some reintegration training and whatnot, and I had things with me. I was taking a flight home, so I couldn't take a lot on the plane, so I mailed a box of books from Texas to Manchester, right? Taped it up, gave it to the post office. They said, yep, it's fine. You know, we'll send it. They did. The box arrived at my house empty. So of course, you know, with the help of Debbie Dingle, we called the Postal Service and say, hey, you know, the contents of this box is missing. You know, here's the box, there's no contents. They start their, you know, their process, their investigation. To this day, they found nothing. And, you know, we made an official report with the postal inspectors, who are federal law enforcement, and they're kind of like, yeah, we'll look into it, but they found nothing. And it's like, look, okay, the postal facilities, they've got cameras, they're secure. You know, we know that it went from this place to this place to this place to this place. At some point, on the floor, there's a whole bunch of books and stuff. You know, they came out of the box. So at which location do you have a pile of books that have my name and you know, censor stamps from Russian prisons? And they're like, well, you know, we can't find anything.
Do you think somebody is trying to hold this box of books thinking that I'm going to be able to sell these or I'm going to be able to use these?
That's the kind of thing that went through our mind.
Because why else would you take them?
Yeah, they have my name. They have the censor marks from the Russian prisons. You know, if somebody put two and two together, they could say, hey, maybe these are valuable. But this is part of it. The fact that the post office is kind of playing dumb, and the postal inspectors won't engage, and the local people are like, well, hey, it didn't happen in Michigan. It happened, you know, in Texas or en route, so it's not our problem. It's kind of like, okay, you know, who do I go to for help? How do I get help? And this is just one of the things that within weeks of coming home I was dealing with, you know. I applied for medical coverage and got a letter back from the government saying I was denied because I'm not a citizen. Well, how am I not a citizen? I mean, and it's that sort of incompetence that I keep running into, where I understand, okay, there's an issue that needs resolving, and I'm a pretty patient person, and I'll work to resolve it. But if you guys are going to come up with, oh, he's not a citizen, or hey, you know, we've done everything we can do, our hands are tied, that's not good enough.
So are you telling me Debbie Dingle and Haley Stevens, they can't cut through some of that?
They're trying to.
They're trying.
They're trying. I mean, if you made a phone call to the postal inspector and said, hey, you know, why won't anybody talk to Paul? That could help.
You're talking about the Postal Service in Texas or the Postal Service in Michigan or both?
Well, you would call the one in Detroit because they're responsible for the destination. Yeah. Yeah.
That happened a year ago?
Yeah.
And they
It's crazy.
gave you no more than 20 days to go through that post-isolation support activity.
Yeah.
For you to decompress and talk to psychologists about everything that you went through.
And you know, because of the sleep deprivation issue, it took me a week just to get back on a kind of a semi-normal sleeping program. We think that should be 60 days to 90 days. And we're working with the State Department and the Department of Defense, who kind of run it, to make it a longer process, but also the psychologists you're working with, let them decide how long you should be there. You know, if it's like, hey, you've got 20 days. Now, if you've been gone 10 months, okay, 20 days might be enough. If you've been gone 5 years, 7 months, and 5 days, and you have issues, 20 days is nothing. That's nothing.
Okay, and then my last question for you: if you had to thank a few people, I mean, and I know I'm sure that list is really long, but who would be at the top of your list, or the top few?
Well, from the government side, I thank Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Jake Sullivan, Antony Blinken, Roger Carstens, and Bill Burns. He was the ambassador in Russia when I first went to Russia and stayed at the embassy. I met him then, and he was the director of CIA who worked the deal that got me out. Okay, so from the government standpoint, those are kind of the top players, but also the staff working with each one of those people, because there were a lot of people at the State Department, at the CIA, in DOD, the National Security Agency, all of these, you know, these kind of lower level people that were involved. There were a lot of people involved. It wasn't just like a small cadre. there was a huge group involved. So, I want to point out that I know the names of the top people. I'll never know the names or faces of the people down below, but a lot of those people down below did a lot to get me out. And then the governments of Canada, England, Ireland, who from day one were supporting me overseas and supporting me at home, supporting my family, in those countries also. They did a tremendous amount. I've spoken to David Lammy, the Foreign Secretary, Melanie Joly, she was the Foreign Secretary for Canada. I've spoken to other leaders in those governments, and I had to say, I had a lot of support from all of them. Nobody ever said, it's an American issue, it's not our business, like kind of Borg Warner tried to say. Everybody said, okay, you're a citizen, you're in harm's way, we're going to do everything we can to help you. A year later, they're still in touch. Hey, what can we do to help? What's happening in your life? Then there were my parents. My parents, they were born during World War II. They grew up with, German planes coming over, rocket bombs blowing up in Birmingham, England, where they grew up. They had bomb shelters in their backyards. They emigrated to Canada. They came to America. They had a nice life here in Manchester. And then, the Russian government takes me hostage. It's the Cold War all over again. So they've put up with a lot in their lives. And I give them a lot of credit, for, just being as strong as they are. But that's where I got a lot of my resilience too. Because, growing up, okay, I'm an immigrant from Canada, but still, there are differences. And coming to America, you have to adjust. And growing up, we had to adjust and we had to do things maybe differently than, how my parents had done things when they grew up in post-war England. But you learn resilience, you learn to adapt. And I think that's the sort of thing that helped me when I was in prison, especially in the labor camp, where there was a lot of adaptation necessary.
But you were ready.
Yeah.
Because of your upbringing.
Upbringing, military experience, other experiences, yeah.
Beautiful. Anything else you want to tell me? Anything else that's important for me to mention in this story?
Well, what I'd like to say is thank you. As a member of the media, your journalism, I know, was crucial in getting people in the local area to understand what was happening. And then journalists around the United States and around the world who consistently for 5.5 years had my story on the radio, on TV, online, in print, making sure that people didn't forget what was happening. That was crucial. So yeah, a big thanks and applause for the media, because they did a lot to keep my story alive and put pressure on the government. And I think this story today will help put pressure on the government to bring other people home, but also improve the compensation, the benefits, things like that, the way we take care of our own once they've come back from a hostage situation. So yeah, I appreciate it.
Because I know you did mention Debbie Dingell and you did mention Congresswoman Amy Stevens. We spoke to her today, and like I told you in the beginning of this interview, she said that, oh my goodness, that she did a lot for you and that you're amazing. So, what did she do for you?
As soon as I lived in Novi, and as soon as I was arrested, Haley Stevens, brand new to Congress, said, hey, he's in my district, what can we do to help? And from the moment that I was arrested to today, she's been supporting me. I had letters and parcels and things from her while I was in prison. She was in communication with my family. I've visited Congress several times since coming home, and she's one of the people that I'm working with to get some improvements with the aftercare and treatment for former hostages. So she's done a lot, and we're
changing laws.
Yeah, she's changing laws. Yeah, Elisa Slotkin, she's another person. We text back and forth all the time. Haley, Elisa, and I. We're discussing issues that matter to hostages' families, and impact the communities the hostages come from. Debbie Dingell, she's very, very active in this area. She would go to my parents' house and have dinner with them. Just check up on them. Actually, once when I knew that she would be at my parents' house, I called. So I called my parents' house, spoke to my parents, and I spoke to Debbie, at the same time from prison. Those three have done a lot. Dan Kildee, the other Michigan representatives and senators, Gary Peters, they've all played a big role. And it didn't matter what district I was in, or even what state I was from, because the representatives and senators from the other states said, this is an American issue. This isn't a Michigan issue. It's not Washtenaw County. It's not Manchester. This is an American issue, and we're going to help. So, you see the petitions that were signed in the House and the Senate. They had all sorts of people's names on them because it was an American issue, and a lot of people were helping. But tremendous support from Debbie Dingell, from Alyssa Slotkin, from Haley Stevens. And like I said, we're texting back and forth all the time. We chat on Facebook and Instagram. When Debbie's in the local area, she stops by and we have a chat. I meet the trio and others in DC when I'm there. So yeah, it's good. They haven't switched off the support. It's still there. And I know that if there's an issue that I need help with, then I can go to them and say, hey, here's the deal, who can you direct me to? And that's the thing that I like, because they haven't forgotten, they haven't moved on. They're still there, and they have a lot to deal with. And there are a lot of other issues that they are dealing with, important issues, but they haven't forgotten about me and my family.
What are you doing now?
For the last, say, 6 months, I've been kind of getting things back to normal, obtaining professional licenses, some of which needed some coursework, some instruction. But I've been working part-time in the security realm, doing some things for some attorneys I know, as well as my advocacy with Congress and whatnot. But I'm just kind of slowly getting back into the field that I'd been in, corporate security. I'm still looking for full-time employment, hopefully in Michigan. I'd like to stay in the Manchester area. My parents are here, they're older, so that would help. But I'm just kind of slowly getting back into a normal life. The lawn needs cutting. There are trees that haven't been trimmed in 5 years. There's a hedge that's always growing crazy that I've got to work on. So there are just normal kind of daily activities and chores and things, and I've just been focused on a lot of that. One of our friends in Manchester gave us 2 little kittens. They're orange. You know how orange cats are, right? They're crazy. But these 2 little kittens, Minnie and Muffin, they're kind of like support cats, right? They're comical. They run around the house. They're really kind, really nice. Well, fairly well behaved for little orange cats. But they've been quite enjoyable. So that's kind of spiced things up a little bit. And then, it's helpful to have a pet. It gives you a sense of purpose, but they're also, they're just nice to have as companions. So my dog Flora died while I was gone, and my cat Moppet died while I was gone. So having, a house without pets was something that I hadn't known for 40 years. So now having these 2 little guys running around is kind of getting back into, that normal life of having pets.
You lost
sharing.
a dog and a cat.
Yeah, my dog Flora, she was 15 years and 4 days when she died. I would call, and I would speak on the phone, and she would be asleep on her bed, and she would get up and she'd come over and listen and wag her tail because she heard my voice and she knew it was me. And we had people visiting, and I would speak to them from the State Department and other agencies, and they'd be on the phone, and they're like, hey, your dog's coming over to the phone. I go, yeah, she's been doing this the entire time. And there was a period in LaForte, about 16 months, the FSB wouldn't let me speak to my family. So I have to wonder, did my dog know where I was? Did my cat Moppet, did she know where I was? It's a cycle of life. People get older, they die. Pets get older, they die. The longer you're held hostage, the more changes. I've always said that a hostage doesn't return home to the home that they left. And it's true, things change. And you have to adapt to that. You're held hostage, you haven't done anything wrong. It's not your fault. You had no control over your release or your captivity. But your life has changed, and you kind of have to just suck it up and deal with it.
How's your health?
My health isn't too bad. I came back really thin and kind of malnourished, and I've been eating everything that I haven't had for 6 years. I'll see lasagna and say, I haven't had lasagna for 6 years, so I eat lasagna. Chocolate cake, all the things that I probably shouldn't be eating, I've just been eating,
That's
nonstop.
Okay. That's okay. I
So-
say enjoy life.
So I've been enjoying life. I need to lose a little weight and get back into shape, but for the most part, with the help of some doctors, my dentist, Justin Geller, and others, I'm back on the right track with my health. I don't have any serious issues. The aches and pains of old age, but nothing serious.